Hello, welcome back. We are in week 5, and I'm just sitting here in my office thinking about all of you, wishing we could be in the same room together. But so glad that we have this online space for discussing ideas, talking about our lives, and what kind of leaders we want to be as we think about our groups and our organizations that we're a part of. So today, I get to talk with you about decision making, which is a process that some of you might dread. And some of you might really love making decisions. In fact, you might think that you're a very good, very precise decision maker. So wherever you land on that spectrum of decision making, hopefully there's something in this lecture today for you. This is my plan for us today, faith integration, talking about decision making processes and a chance to reflect and look ahead. We are in week 5, which means, goodness, we only have 3 weeks left of our class after this. Look at you all just trucking along. Well, I'm wondering if you have seen this person before. Have I talked about her yet in this class? I feel like if I've gone this far and not talked about Dr. Brene Brown, then I don't even know. But this is Dr. Brene Brown, and she has one of the most watched TED Talks in the history of TED on the power of vulnerability. I'm actually going to link it on our Canvas for us under the week 5 lecture videos. And let me just tell you, it is 20 minutes of time well spent. If you have not heard this talk on vulnerability and the power of being vulnerable and where we come, where vulnerability and courage intersect, then I really recommend you do that with your time this week. Dr. Brene Brown is a hero of mine for a couple of reasons. One, she's done this really incredible work on what it means to be courageous and vulnerable, and I think she's really tapped into something critical about our culture here in the United States, which is that we have a very hard time being open and being vulnerable with one another. We often see vulnerability as a sign of weakness. And what Dr. Brene Brown shows is that is actually the opposite, that there is strength in vulnerability. There's strength in the courage to be vulnerable, to be open. And so, yes, even in that uncertainty, even in that risk of vulnerability, some really incredible things can happen. And especially as leaders and future leaders, it's really important that we get into the habit of practicing vulnerability in safe contexts. So I have the scripture up here, Joshua 1:9. Goodness, you've probably heard this one before. God is speaking to Joshua, and he says, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous." To which I say, easier said than done, Lord. Sometimes it's hard to be strong and courageous. He says, "Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Yes, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Okay, great. How? So again, watch this video from Dr. Brene Brown. Something that she says is that vulnerability is the willingness to show up and be seen, even when there are no guarantees. Yes, just sit with that for a minute. And so what I want you to think about after watching this video is that Dr. Brown says that vulnerability is our most accurate measure of courage. What does this kind of courage, the courage to be vulnerable, look like to you in a trusted group setting? So do you have a group that you can rely upon, that you can trust, that you can go to, that you can share with openly? And then I want you to think about, in this educational process, what we're engaging in right here. What does it look like to show up and be seen each week? Especially, I think, challenging in the context of not being able to physically see each other, right? How do we show up in a courageous and vulnerable way? And what's an advantage to having this environment available to you as you grow and learn? So how can we really take the most advantage of this opportunity to be courageous, to be vulnerable, to lean into our educational process, and to grow? These are things I want you to think about. But remember what that scripture says, be strong and courageous. And here's a little bit of how you can do that. Group project. Woo. Okay, so you have 2 pieces that you're responsible for this week. The first is just get that rough draft out. So your team needs to work together. By Wednesday midnight, I'd like to see a rough draft on Canvas, as much completion as possible. Okay, I think this is going to be really important so that you can feel like you've got a handle on what your team is doing. You know where your strong points are, your weak points are all of those things. Then you're going to turn that into Canvas. One team member can turn that into Canvas. And then by Friday, one of your team members also needs to post a copy of your so far rough draft of the project in a thread on this specific discussion board called the Rough Draft Peer Review. So one team member is going to post that, and then each member of your team is going to review the work of another team. For example, if you are in group 1, you are going to go to group 2's thread, download their rough draft, read through it, and actually do this peer review sheet that is linked here on Canvas. Each one of you is responsible for this. So this is actually individually graded, which means it's on you to, between Friday and Sunday night, go onto Canvas, go on to this peer review discussion board, grab the teams that you're doing the peer review with, grab their copy of their paper, read through it, and do that peer review sheet. Re-upload your peer review sheet to their thread, so they're basically getting feedback from at least 4 other people. I know group 4 has 5 members, so you'll be giving group 3 a little bit more feedback. But that's the process. If there's any questions about that, if it's confusing to you, please do reach out and let me know. This is because, of course, we can't sit in a classroom and just trade papers. So we're doing it a little bit creatively. So that's this week again. Remember, by Wednesday midnight, your rough draft on Canvas. That's the whole team. That's for 75 points. That's a big chunk. And then I'll be providing also some comments on your rough drafts. And then the peer review process, you can start that as soon as it's posted, basically in that discussion. And then by Sunday midnight, each of you individually needs to do that process. Here we are, still talking about tubs. We are still in this internal influences, which is that center column, and today we're going to focus on decision making. So I want you to get out a piece of paper. If you need to pause this video, you certainly can. And I want you to write down each of the decisions you can remember making so far today. Now, if you're watching this early in the morning, you might have less. If you're watching this late at night, you can stop at 10 or so decisions. I don't expect you to write down all the decisions you made all day long. I'll say I started with, I decided to wake up early so I could help my little son get to school on time for his student council meeting. I decided what to wear. I decided where to get coffee. Listen, that is a very important decision in my life. Today it was Lofty Coffee in La Costa, and I had a NOLA style cold brew, which was just delicious. A little minty, a little vanilla-y. Some bigger decisions I made was what to teach in one of my classes. So I was narrowing down some topics. Okay, these are 4 things I decided today. This is going to take a lot longer. You probably don't want to sit and watch me decide about what I decided. So now that I have this list, I'm going to go back through my list and rate these decisions on a scale from 1 to 4. So some thought given. I did give some thought to waking up early. That would be a 2. What to wear, way too much thought given, because it was chilly out today and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to be cold, but I also had to be dressed up for work. So, that's a thing. Where to get coffee? No, I did give some thought of that. And what to teach? Some thought. I haven't yet agonized over a decision today, which is great. And I hope that might be the case for you too. But if you have had to agonize over a decision, I hope you're happy with the decision that you finally made. Hang on to that because we're going to use that in a little bit. Next, I have a really cool little quiz for you. What is your decision-making style? There's a link on Canvas for you that will be in I'll put it in our lecture video lineup page, and I'm also going to put it on our thought question page because it's part of our activity for our thought question. So on this quiz, you answer, I think it's about 10 to 12 questions. They're very easy. Like, are you, what are some of the questions? I can't decide. Do you make impulsive purchases? Yes or no? And so what this test is going to do, this little quiz, is it's going to assess you on what type of decision maker you might be. Now, remember, this is one of these quizzes. The caveat is it's not super precise. So if you click through to the other decision-making styles and decide you're more another style, that's totally fine. When I took the quiz, it came back that I am a systematic external decision maker. Now, basically what that means is that I gather a lot of information before I make decisions. I'm not very impulsive, although I am kind of an impulsive shopper. But other kinds of bigger decisions, I really do think through, almost sometimes to a fault. Sometimes I tend to overthink. And external means that I sometimes process out loud. I can think about the pros and cons. I like to talk to others, my husband, my best friend. I might send a text, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? So I talk and then I think. That's the external piece. And you might be any combination of spontaneous, external, systematic, or internal as far as your decision-making skills. So again, you're going to take that quiz and then hang on to that because we're going to use it for our thought questions. Here come our thought questions. So with those two exercises being done, what kind of decisions did you make today? Rate them from 1 to 4, and then taking the quiz and reading the results of your decision-making style. What I want you to do is think about these results in relation to your own profession and decision-making. So what did these exercises tell you about how you make most of your decisions? What types of decision-making processes are most helpful to you at work, at home, or school? And spoiler alert, I'm about to talk about some decision-making processes. There's also a bunch in your text for this week. Do you see that you have room to grow as you make decisions in your professional work environment? If so, share your thoughts on that. Where do you want to grow in that area? How do you want to make better, more informed decisions, for example? Or how do you want to maybe agonize less over a decision? And then in the future, as a leader of a group or a team, what do you think you could do to help your team with decision making so that they're feeling supported in their own decision making processes? All right, so you're going to think through all those things, write a post reflecting on those questions, on your results of your activities, and then, of course, respond and interact with your classmates. All right, let's talk a little bit about decisions. Now, if you are, again, part of an organization, many of you are working in the medical field already, in a hospital, in a doctor's office, or another professional facility, you probably, as I'm talking about this, will identify names and faces, or at least you'll be thinking about the structure of your organization. So let's just talk about maybe a hospital, for example. When we talk about levels of decision, we have 3 kind of main levels that we can imagine of decision making. Now, of course, we're going to have sub-levels, and there's always a power structure within the levels. For example, a CEO has quite a bit of power over the management teams. The board of directors might have power over the CEO or in conjunction with the CEO. But those folks at the very top of an organization, they're going to be the ones making the most strategic decisions. So things like, should we merge or acquire another company? Should we pursue a new service that we provide or a new product line? Should we grow our organization? Should we downsize it? Those are really big strategic decisions. Those are not going to be made at the employee kind of rank and file level. That's just not who is making decisions usually in an organization like that. And then in the middle, I think it's perfect because managers often kind of reside in that middle space between top management and then the rest of the employees. We find that middle managers are making tactical decisions. So those day-to-day, what do we need to do to help facilitate employees from these two companies that are coming together, working together? How could we market a new product line or get the word out about the new service that we're providing? What do we do when we're downsizing? So managers would be communicating those kinds of decisions, and also they're hearing from the top management about the strategic decisions, and they're passing that information down often also to the employee level. Now, on those operational decisions, this last level, this is the nitty gritty. How am I going to talk and communicate with the new coworkers or with patients? How do I communicate with our patients about the new service that we're providing or the new way that we're going to go about managing their information or getting results out to them? Okay, hopefully this is a helpful example to you. Those kinds of operational decisions are being made on this employee level. And I'm imagining that many of you are residing within that kind of tactical decision level as a manager or future manager, or the operational, really day-to-day nitty-gritty kind of decision-making levels. What happens with decision-making and communication in an organization that can be sticky is that often we have these really top-level strategic decisions being made without a lot of input or insight or understanding of how the folks at the bottom level of the organization, of the org chart, are feeling, or the kinds of pressures they're facing because of these big decisions that are being made. So as you continue to work your way up through leadership in your organization, can I encourage you to really consider what does it look like to communicate decision making well? And what does it look like to really get folks from all levels involved in decision making in a way that they understand what the implications are of the decisions that are being made, and also that they feel that they've got buy-in on those decisions because they've had a chance to voice their opinions and their thoughts and their insight into those decisions that are happening. So what kinds of types of decision making happen in our world? Well, this is an economic model. I love this because I am a big nerd and I study policy. And this is very similar to the policy making model when it comes to developing policy and implementing it. So you may have something similar to this when it comes to decision making in your own organization, especially because your decision making needs to be very precise. In the medical field, obviously, it's whether or not someone is well or unwell, whether they have complications, or sometimes it can be a life or death situation. So this economic model really follows a precise series of steps, and you can see here all the way from identifying the problem to weighing decision criteria, generating and evaluating alternatives, choosing that alternative, implementing the decision, and then evaluating and starting all over again. The reason this is considered an economic model is, okay, if you remember back to econ, if you took economics in high school, or maybe you've taken some, in your higher ed experience, rational decision making, or the economic model, really assumes a couple of things. It assumes perfect information, which means that we have all the information and all the right information. It assumes no biases in that information, or no biases in the decision making, and it assumes that you will be optimizing the decisions. Now, it may not be the most rational thing after all to do this kinds of decision making, because who really has all the perfect information when it comes to making a decision? Who has all of the correct information, or the wealth of knowledge that can be acquired about making a decision? So you may not have done a decision-making process this thorough, but perhaps you've done something similar to it. And if that's the case, I want you to think about this question. Have you ever used this thorough of a decision-making process? And if so, what was the outcome? Now, again, I've shared that when I'm looking at policies that have been made, or looking at developing public policy or programs for example, a social welfare program or another program that will impact a big group of people, doing this thorough of a decision-making process is really necessary. But it's not always necessary for every type of decision. For example, choosing my morning coffee, probably don't need to go through a rational decision-making process. In fact, I'll be cranky because I haven't had my coffee by the time I'm done with the process. So let's talk about bounded rationality decision-making. This is another kind of decision-making that also takes into account that we have limitations as humans. We're not robots or, Watson, the IBM computer that has limitless knowledge. We're not that. Even though we're very smart, we don't have that much knowledge. We have limitations. So bounded rationality really recognizes those limitations. And according to this model, individuals knowingly limit their options. So knowing that I can't come up with all the options and I can't come up with all the information and I don't have all of the time that it's going to take, I come up with a grouping of possibilities, and based on that, I make my decision. The important part of bounded rationality approaches the tendency to satisfice. Satisficing is a term coined by Herbert Simon, and it's from the words satisfy and suffice being put together. And this refers to accepting that first alternative that meets your minimum criteria. Will this satisfice given the situation? Yes? Okay, let's go for it. For example, many college graduates don't conduct a national search for potential job openings. Instead, they focus their search on a limited geographic area, knowing that they have a certain area that they want to live in. Even if it may not be the ideal situation, if they get an offer in that area and it means them not having to move elsewhere, uproot, etc., they may go with that option. That would be considered a bounded rationality type decision to be made. Satisficing is similar to rational decision-making that we just talked about, but the main difference is that rather than choosing the best option and maximizing the potential outcome, the decision makers save some cognitive time, some thought time, some energy, choosing that what seems like the best first alternative that meets the criteria. So for this, what kinds of decisions best fit this model? Are there things in your workplace, in your life, that you can think of that you would say, yeah, I would do kind of bounded rationality decision making? I think the choice of career, as far as workplace or school to attend, those are good examples there. Then we have what is called intuitive decision making. Now this has a few different steps in it. One is recognizing a pattern. So thanks to training, experience, and knowledge, these decision makers that use intuitive decision making have an idea of how well a given solution may work. And then they can play the action out to see what the outcome could be based on their prior experience. If they run through this mental model and they see that the solution will not work, they can alter the solution before setting it into action. And if it's still not deemed a workable solution, it's discarded as an option and a new idea is tested until a workable solution is found. When they put the solution into motion, the key point is that only one choice is considered at a time here. But what intuitive decision making does is it really marries the head and the heart. The head is that decision. You have logic, you have reason, you have experience, and then you have the experience, the gut instinct, and the heart that feed into the intuition. Now, I would think that this type of decision-making might sound familiar to you, especially working in your work environment. Because you have the support, you have the tools, you have logic and reason, you have your training. That's the analysis piece. And then you have your intuition, which is your experience, your gut, your heart, what you're sensing in that moment is right, what you know to be, what you've known to be effective in the past. And using those rules of thumb, you're able to come to a decision. So what kinds of decisions might best fit this model? I think, correct me if I'm wrong though, talk to me about it on the discussion boards, this might be a type of decision making that you're used to employing. And then we have, this is kind of my favorite. Creative decision making. Now, this kind of decision making actually requires time. It's important. You can't be pressed in creative decision making because a couple of the steps take a little longer than others. So there's 5 steps to creative decision making that are similar to the previous decision making models in some ways, but in other ways are pretty different. First, we have the problem identification, which is the step in which the need for problem solving becomes pretty apparent. Hey, we've got a problem, we need to solve it. Immersion is the step in which the need for a problem, is the step in which the decision maker can consciously think about the problem and gather information. So if I'm trying to decide on, how to make the best cold brew coffee at home, I recognize the problem. Maybe I'm spending too much money going to Lofty Coffee. There's my endorsement for the day. And so I immerse myself in the world of how to make an excellent home cold brew coffee. I am looking at coffee makers. I'm looking at beans. I'm looking at roasts. I'm looking at time, recipes, all of this to try to immerse myself in this world. During incubation, then, I would set the problem aside and I wouldn't think about it for a while. Now, don't worry, I'm still thinking about coffee, right? But maybe I'm not thinking so much in this as intensely as I was in the immersion process about how to make coffee and what I might buy for equipment at home so that I can make my own cold brew. But at this time, what's interesting is that my brain will actually be working on the problem unconsciously. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but if you're making a decision and you take the time to really immerse yourself in that, and then you step away from it and you give it time, do you find that as that idea or that decision incubates that you're able to have a fresh perspective on it when you come back to it? Well, that's what happens in step 4, ideally, is the illumination. That's the insight moment, the aha moment, when the solution to the problem becomes apparent. And sometimes it's when it's least expected. I'm going to share with you a story about that in a minute. That sudden insight is what is also called the eureka moment, the aha, like, whoa, I never thought of that, but yeah, of course this is the way to go. And then step 5, you would verify and apply. So when the decision maker consciously verifies the feasibility of the solution, is it possible, and implements the decision. Here's a fun story. This is actually a true story. There was a NASA scientist who was trying to figure out a better way to de-ice planes to make the process faster and safer. Now, for those of you that have never lived anywhere than California, ice is the thing that is cold and can form on vehicles and planes and buildings and sidewalks and roads, and it's very inconvenient. It's one of the many reasons why I moved from Minnesota to California after my undergrad. I didn't want to deal with ice anymore. So this NASA scientist, after recognizing the problem, he immerses himself in the literature to understand all of the options, and he works on the problem for months trying to figure out a solution. Well, then the scientist, he steps away from the problem. Here's what's cool. He was sitting outside of a McDonald's restaurant with his grandchildren, and the solution dawned on him. He looked at the yellow arches, the sign, McDonald's, the M, and the golden arches of the M of the McDonald's logo inspired his solution. He would design the de-icer as a series of M's. What? So cool. This represented the illumination stage. And of course he went and he applied and verified it as creative solution. And, then he was left to kind of decide, did that actually pass muster? Did it solve the problem? If not, he might head back to step 1 and work through things a little bit more. But creative decision making is pretty special. If you have the time and space and energy and resources to do it, you can come up with some very new imaginative ideas. So what kinds of decisions might best fit this model? You could think about that. And here's where I want to challenge you this week. Is there a decision you've been putting off? You need to make it? If that's the case, what action can you take this week to move yourself closer to deciding? Maybe you decide to employ one of these decision-making models that we've just talked about, or you use some of the decision-making processes that are talked about in your textbook, or you just need someone to bounce a decision off of. Hey, I'm here. Go ahead and send me a text or send me an email. I'm happy to walk through it with you. So looking ahead, remember, we've got kind of a lot on our plates this week, but don't worry, we'll get through all of it together. Meet with your team, complete your rough draft, submit that by Wednesday midnight. Add to your peer review discussion board by Friday midnight. That's just one team member needs to do that. And then you'll individually complete the peer review process by Sunday night. If you have any questions at all, please reach out to me. So happy to spend this time with you. And don't forget, also, we have our office clip. It's on our lecture page. We'll see you next time.